Joining us now is the great Ben Burgis. He's author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, forthcoming Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, also from Zero Books. Ben, how are you? You ready for your song?
Of course.
Let's do it. I want to go to mockery really badly,
I
Ben,
will.
so please go.
Okay.
You got to restrain me, man. I love that. Debunk all of it. Logic. You're going to show us how to argue it out.
This is based on data from a bunch of different countries. There's abundant evidence that at this point that's bullshit. Breaking down these right-wing arguments and looking at how they're supposed to fit together.
Okay, break it down. Debunk all of it. Break it down. Debunk all of it. So, Ben, we are experiencing a public health crisis. We have a authoritarian, xenophobic president who is... I don't want to personalize incompetence to Donald Trump because the Republican Party has been trying to dismantle a social infrastructure of this country.
Yes.
And so he's going to fuse that incompetence and attempt to address that incompetence because he's terrified of the political consequences while also trying to weaponize it for his, MAGA racist agenda.
Yeah, and it is really dangerous, I think, to as tempting as it is, because Trump's so cartoonish. I think it's really dangerous to personalize it to him.
Yes.
Because that just feeds into this liberal thing of, longing for the supposedly reasonable Democrats, so the supposedly reasonable Republicans, and romanticizing, every Republican who comes along who says a bad word about Trump, which is, individuals come and go, but they're the long-term agenda of ripping down what little public health infrastructure we have isn't going anywhere.
Indeed. And speaking of which, again, Bernie Sanders is still in the hunt, and he's the person who has a policy set that would save a lot of lives normally and is indispensable from dealing with this type of crisis in the future. I want to just point out here, too, that this answer that you're about to debunk is very important, frankly, for really emphasizing that these folks do have an ideology. If they were just technocrats, they would say, you know what? The polls are starting to look decent for Medicare for all. Yes, it can be demagogued. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, the insurance company will spend trillions of blood money to undermine it, but there's a base there of people that support it. And, I'm trying to do efficient government here. We can't keep doing this. We can't have such a dangerous public health system. Everybody needs to be covered. Here's how Joe Biden responded to Lawrence O'Donnell. And again, we'll debunk it, but I want you to actually see this as not just sort of the incoherence of the incoherent, but actually as an expression of pretty strong ideology.
No question. Let's flash forward. Your president, Bernie Sanders, is still active in the Senate. He manages to get Medicare for all through the Senate in some compromised version, the Elizabeth Warren version or other version. Nancy Pelosi gets a version of it through the House of Representatives. It comes to your desk. Do you veto it?
I would veto anything that delays providing the security and the certainty of health care being available now. If they got that through and by some miracle, and there was an epiphany that occurred, and some miracle occurred that said, okay, it's passed, then you got to look at the cost. I want to know, how did they find the $35 trillion? What is that doing? Is it going to significantly raise taxes on the middle class, which it will? What's going to happen? Look, my opposition isn't to the principle that you should have Medicare. Health care should be a right in America. My opposition relates to whether or not, A, it's doable, two, what the cost is, and what the consequences for the rest of the budget are. How are you going to find $35 trillion over the next 10 years without having profound impacts on everything from taxes for middle class and working class people, as well as the impact on the rest of the budget?
Okay, Ben. First of all, before you debunk this, can you be as mentally acute as that?
Honestly, for Biden, that was relatively together.
That's true.
He didn't start saying, I don't know how it's going to impact the rest of the thing, the thing. Uh, but no, I mean, he is just jamming together every misleading health insurance industry lobby, propaganda lie, and bad argument that there is. So just to take it from the top, this is the least of it, but I think this is a good thing to kind of train ourselves to notice. When he says 35 trillion, right? Which, by the way, I think he's getting from the Mercatus Center, which is a Koch brothers funded think tank, which famously trumpeted that number because it sounded so big.
Right.
And disguised the fact that even according to their own findings, Matt Brunig caught them out on this, even according to their own findings, that was actually less than the total of healthcare spending under the current system for the next 10 years. But when he says 35 trillion, now, of course, the actual annual cost is a lot because healthcare is a huge sector. It costs a ton of money regardless of what kind of system you have, right? That, like, whether you are having people pay in premiums and copays and deductibles and that's how you're financing it, right? Or you're having people pay taxes and that's how you're financing it. Either way, ridiculously massive sums of money are passing through someone's hands because healthcare is incredibly expensive. Of course, people say, "Oh, it's bigger than the entire federal budget or whatever." Yeah, it's a big sector of the economy that would now be nationalized. The health insurance sector. But when you say 35 trillion, it's such a stupid game that you're playing because what you're doing, what he means, and he didn't even bother to say this in the clip, but if pushed, presumably, what he might remember to say is that's 35 trillion over the course of 10 years, right? Anytime there's some proposed government spending that you want to make sound just ridiculously massive, the trick everybody always does is instead of doing the normal thing of saying what it'll cost per year, they'll just say what it'll cost per decade so they can move the decimal place one over.
Right.
It's such a cheap trick. You might as well say, oh, it's going to cost $350 trillion over the course of the next century.
Right. I'm surprised they don't, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when he says, "Oh, I would veto anything that would threaten the security of getting health care right now," to the extent that I could follow what his thought is even supposed to be there, I think this is just the fear-mongering about, oh, you'll lose the health insurance that you have, right? Because otherwise, I don't even know. I mean, he's not even expressing a proposition. I literally don't know what he means unless he's just sort of trying in a fumbling way to express that thought. But of course, this is an equivocation, right? Losing the health insurance you have now, meaning you lose your health insurance and you have to go through this horrible process that we all hate of switching to new health insurance, finding a new in-network doctor, all of that shit, right? That everybody has been through, right? Even if you're a middle-class person with good health insurance, it's an incredibly stressful process. Everybody hates it for good reason. And so we all have this kind of Pavlovian reaction to hearing that phrase, lose your health insurance, because you're imagining something like that happening, even though what it actually means is that health is being paid for through the public treasury rather than through this rent-seeking middleman parasitical private company. That, in fact, not only are you not going to have to go through this process, but you'll never have to go through it again because Medicare for all would mean that there's a single payer, so you're never going to have to transition from one payer to another with all the stress that goes through that again. And the only way to go out of network is to leave the country, which I guess in the era of coronavirus we can't do anyway. And then finally, when he says, how are you going to find the money, the $35 trillion? This is the biggest, normally I'm not crazy about people using terms like gaslighting when they talk about politics, but I have to say it kind of fits. that because the media and the centrist candidates, and now the one remaining centrist candidate, Biden, have told us so many times that Bernie is being like evasive about how to find the money.
Total, yeah.
Total nonsense. Yeah. In fact, at all the debates, right? This used to be when Warren was in the debates and everything. This used to be this really tedious thing because they'd spend like the first half hour of every debate interrogating Warren about whether she'd be willing to raise middle class taxes, and she'd go through this weird evasive dance about it. And then finally, when they got around to letting Bernie talk, he'd be like, "Yeah, of course, middle income taxpayers would pay more, but they'd save money overall." Right. Because of course, when you are pooling together everybody's, and the money that people are spending on health insurance, when you're pooling that together in a public fund with no middleman who has to like extract their piece of it, right? That's a more efficient thing, right? You don't have to take as much from anybody. That's about as obvious and intuitive as something about, funding for a government program could possibly be. So obviously the answer to where do you find the money is, well, first of all, the best answer is, soak the rich, scale back the overseas empire, et cetera. But even if you're not going to do anything like that, right? Even if you have a pretty regressive tax to pay for it, most people, pretty much anybody who's not rich, right, is going to be saving some money on this just because it's a more efficient way to do it.
That's it. Yeah, I'm reminded I'm with the ANC on liberation. I'm with them. 3 months later, it's like, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know who I mean, F.W. de Klerk was very nice to me.
Yeah, it is amazing, right? I've got to say that Elizabeth Warren spent like a year, 2 years presenting herself as an advocate of Medicare for all. Presumably, a lot of the people who supported her for those 2 years and sent her money instead of sending Bernie Sanders money, wasted their votes on her on Super Tuesday. Presumably, a lot of those people believed her. And now, faced with, whatever, not that it even matters anymore, but, faced with a choice between a candidate who lives, eats, sleeps, and breathes Medicare for all and one who literally says he would veto it if it passed the House and the Senate, she needs some time to herself. And, and Elizabeth Warren, she doesn't owe these men anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, or the tens of millions of people without health insurance. Apparently she doesn't owe them anything.
Well, did they vote for me? I can guarantee you there's at least several people that I did a selfie with that didn't have health care. So delivered.
Yeah. No, I really, I really just want to see, like, if you could do, the Rick and Morty device to watch TV in alternate universes. Like, I really want to see the TV news, the MSNBC in the version of reality where Biden wins the nomination, and then Bernie says that, he's going to have to think about whether to endorse Trump.
I'm not going to
spend
I'm not in a space where I could talk really, even process this emotionally. So, to be clear, I don't owe you anything. That would work very well. Ben Cohen can write an essay in The Atlantic about, like, it was very hard for the Jewish psyche. All right. Ben Burgis, as always, we appreciate you. Become a patron of Ben's great page. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.